Okay, welcome everybody. I do need to call the meeting to order, so I'm officially calling the meeting to order. We have 3 of our commissioners here right now. Danny Walsh just called and said he's on the way. He'll be here in like 2 minutes. And so we'll have Danny here as well. Tonight we're going to talk about budget. Last year we did this because there was a lot of interest about the budget itself and what it looks like and trying to explain some of those pieces and parts. And we had a pretty good crowd. We thought this year we would do the same thing in advance of our public hearing. So we'll go through the schedule here in a second on the slides, but we will still have our regular public hearing required by state law in a couple of weeks. And obviously every citizen has the opportunity to come up to the public hearing and speak as well, and we'll talk about the budget again. But the listening session, we found out last year, is a much more informal way for people to try to understand the budget or ask questions. And if you don't want to ask it in public today with me, we also have all of our department heads and staff here, so we can ask specific questions of them even after the meeting if that makes you more comfortable. So, let's start with our governing body. I'm Mayor Lewis. If you didn't know that, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Mayor Lewis. Commissioner Walsh is on his way. He's literally driving here now. Commissioner Wilson is right over here. If y'all know Brenda. We've got Commissioner Josh Core chose not to be with us tonight. He's at a different event. Commissioner Karen Lewis is right there, and Commissioner Tyrone Canty is right here. And so the Havelock organizational chart, citizens of Havelock, you guys elect a mayor and board of commissioners. Mayor and board of commissioners hire the city manager. Some of y'all have seen this before in our listening session, so I'm not going to dwell on these slides. But we select the city manager as the only employee that the mayor and board hire and fire, and then the manager is in charge of hiring and managing the rest of our city departments. And while we're talking city departments, let's just run through it. So, in case you have a specific question, you've got Kimberly right here in the front. She's our finance director. You've got Mary Waggle. She is our clerk. Katrina is our planning and inspections department head. Chris McGee, your city manager. Cindy Morgan, your assistant city manager. Before I forget, Chad Ives, your IT director. And then on the far end down there, Patrick Lee, your public works director. Tom's your fire chief. Mike, your assistant fire chief. Thank you, sir. We've got our Captain Fadina here because also our chief is at a different event for Back to Blue tonight, so they're kind of shared duties. We've got Greta here, she's your PIO, and Rick is here. So there's Rick, about missed him. There's Rick, our utilities director. And then Pam, Kelvin's hiding by himself. Kelvin, Parks and Rec. And Pam is here, I can't see it because of Jeff. Pam, your tourist and event center director. Then you have other employees too, like JC is in our finance department, Eric's in our utilities department. So they're here to answer questions if, 1, I can't answer them because we get way too specific, or 2, if you just want to talk to them today before we leave. This is our mission, core values, and principles of excellence. Y'all have all seen this. I don't want to bore you with it, but I will say these are the kinds of values that the city takes into account when we're trying to create a budget document like this one that we're going to talk about. We thought it would be good to look at the 23-24 stats, and we've been through this at a couple other listening sessions since last July. But this is what this year's budget looks like, or this is what our quick stats are for the city when we're considering budget. What are we doing? We've got 130 employees, 47 street miles, 6.3 square miles of a city, 12 parks. There are 5,882 utility customers. That means customers that have water or sewer. There are 80 miles of sewer main underground. Our population right now is about 16.6. North Carolina OMB has us more like 17.6. That was as of the census 2020. We've talked about that before with squadrons leaving. We're in the trough. We're rising back up. We expect to be back to our 20,000 number by about 2028, 2030 time range. Average home value for this year was $159,374. And you should remember that because that number changes for this current year. All right, Chad? Our general tax rate right now is 68 cents per 100. Our ad valorem tax base is $974 million. A value of 1 penny this year that we're in right now, for every penny collected, we get $96,000. This year's budget, we got $15 million in general fund, $3 million in water, almost 5.5 in sewer. Solid waste is 1.3. Solid waste, that's your blue can, and your green, white, and brown goods picked up on the side of the curb. Towards the event center is about $500,000 total, and then our E911 fund, which is $167,000. And just to refresh your memory, the E911 fund is a very, very specific allocated amount of money from the state of North Carolina that can only be used for very specific things within our 911 circuit. So it could be buying hardware or something for the telecommunications, or sometimes MDTs, the computers for officers count, but it's very, very restricted. And so there are only certain things you can spend out of that very small amount of money. For a total of $25.5 million for this current year's budget. All right? So here's kind of how the budget process works. And really staff really starts in budget around, I always say October, November. They're already thinking about what does the next budget look like and trying to put together their personal departmental budgets for everyone to come together. In January, they start working on our CIP, which is our capital improvement plan. Capital outlay requests and major program requests were required from every single department. So what equipment you were going to need, what capital outlay you might have, whether it be carryover from past years or new items. March and April, the operating requests are submitted, meaning they all go to the city manager's office and finance, basically. And then finance presented a budget draft to the manager, and that's where we start. And so that budget usually is really, 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 really big. And Danny Walsh is here, Commissioner Walsh, if you don't know who he is, there he is in the back, just arrived, as promised. So usually that starts really, really large. And at that point, staff gets to work, and they start making cuts within their own departments, and then they work together in what we call budget lockdowns and meetings like that, where all the department heads sit down in a room together for days at a time, going through each other's budgets and agreeing on what can be cut to try to get to a balanced budget before it gets out of the manager's office. The manager then makes all the final decisions for the staff version of the budget with the team input from his department heads, which are all the folks that I introduced at the beginning. Budget became available for public inspection in May, and that's when we published our notice of public hearing, and then we started our budget workshops. And so last week, we had 3 budget workshops. The first one was Monday from 2 to 5, 1400 to 1700. Then we had one Wednesday from, I want to say 1800 to like 22:30. We were here until like 10:30 that night. And then Friday, we were back at 1300 because we weren't finished, and we were here until about 1700 on Friday. So that was our 3 workshops for the board to go through everything presented by staff and actually start to put the budget together. What it'll look like moving forward is obviously we're having our listening session today. Our public hearing is June 3rd, which is only a week and a half away. The board will officially adopt the budget June 24th, and we have to do it before June 30th. Whatever the budget looks like has to be adopted before June 30th. June 24th is what we have scheduled now for that Monday. And then July 1 is the official start date of our budget. So that's the schedule. So budget really, while we talk about it being a process that starts July 1, it takes staff and the board over half a year really to build a budget every year and get it prepared to go out to the city. Okay. Now we're going to talk about, we call them global budget issues. These are typically things that affect the entire budget. The first one up here is user fee increases in permits of 3.9%. And so how do you, and I'll stop for a second and say, how do you come up with 3.9%, right? So the direction from the Board of Commissioners to staff is every year for fee increases and for our cost of living adjustment for our employees, we use the standard CPI, the Consumer Price Index for the country. And we use the general. And if you know much about CPI, there are very, very specific ones as well. There's ones for construction, there's ones for all different factors of the economy. We use the general one, and then we use that number. So all CPI is telling you is that $1 from last year would be the same as $1 today. So inflation this year is 3.9%. There have been years where the CPI was 7 to 8%. I think last year it was well over 7%. There have been years where CPI was 1% or 0.5% in the last decade, in which case that's the adjustment the board made. They typically try to make those adjustments based on CPI. So the user fee increase in permits, 3.9%. So that means if you come to get a permit to build a shed or put up a pool or a fence, those fees will go up by 3.9%. There are going to be some additional permits added in the fire department. The fire marshal has to do inspections in certain businesses and buildings, commercial, and up till now, the city has never charged for those inspections. Every municipality and county around us charges for those inspections. So this year, there is a nominal fee for those inspections. Some of them are, I don't remember the exact phrase, but it's safety and life and safety. Life safety code that we're required to enforce. And those typically include safety things, it's inspections of sprinkler systems and all that really is applied to commercial type buildings. And so there'll be fees for that. Enterprise funds show an increase of 10% in water, 25% in sewer. All state revenues are adjusted per North Carolina League of Municipalities Conference. So when we talk about state revenues, we're talking about things like franchise tax, which is when electric companies or cable companies pay money to the state and then it comes back to us. We're talking about sales tax. So the League of Municipalities in the state of North Carolina typically make a forecast for what they expect that number to be for the coming year. They're usually pretty close, and so we use that as our forecast when we're trying to decide what our revenues look like from the state. And so we've adjusted them all per their forecast. We don't know what the legislature might do. That's always something that we talk about going into our budget. We have to have a budget by June 30th. You may have noticed the last 3 or 4 years, the state of North Carolina has not had a budget by July 1, even though they're supposed to as well. Sometimes they're bleeding into August and even September to get their budget passed, approved, and signed by the governor. If they make major changes to their budget or to policy that affects how we do what we do, it can affect our budget. So unfortunately, we have to make some of those decisions in the dark, not knowing. For our personnel, you'll see the COLA number, which is the cost of living adjustment, is 3.9%. So that means all of our 130 employees would receive 3.9% change based on the cost of living adjustment. And then a longevity of 1.7%, and that's every employee that's been here for longer than a year. 6 additional positions are included in the budget this year. 1 stormwater manager. That's a position that a lot of you might remember last year we started a stormwater fee based on our position as a Camas County and state of North Carolina requirements from DEQ, from the Division of Environmental Quality. That stormwater fee we've now been collecting partially throughout this year. And one of the things that will happen through that stormwater fee is it funds a stormwater manager. And so that position will be open to be hired this year. 1 utility position, 3 firefighter EMTs, 1 building inspector level 3 for half a year. And I'll explain that. So for the board to hire any employee, they have to be budgeted for. Or for the manager to hire an employee. The manager hires employees. But for the manager to have the authority to do that, they have to be budgeted for by the board of commissioners within the budget. So typically when you see half a year, it means that they can't hire the position until January 1. Right? So, and there are reasons sometimes that you do that based on timing or other things, maybe just to save some cost. In this case, it does save half the cost on the tax rate of having to hire in January versus July 1. But in this one, there's a little bit more math than that because currently our building inspector level 3 is a part-time, he's a retired building level 3 inspector in the area that he already retired and has come back and has been working with us as a contractor because we only have a building level 1 right now. By funding to start January 1 for half a year, when our current building inspector 3 vacates that position at the end of the year, his salary that we pay now part-time would be enough to make up for the other half without the board having to change the budget. So that's why it's half a year in this case. Because the other half the board doesn't have to come up with until the other position leaves, and then we'll have that money in the budget, if that makes sense. Benefit insurance and contingency. So these are I usually, the first 4 are things that are kind of sort of out of our control. Our retirement plan is through the state of North Carolina. It's managed by the state of North Carolina, and it goes through the state. There's been an increase of 5.6% that we have to pay, and we're mandated to pay that as a city. Health insurance, we are in our own pool, our own risk pool, we're self-insured for health insurance. We made that decision, I don't know, 12 years ago, maybe. It's been a while, and stepped away from some of the other pools, and it has resulted in us being able to keep our health insurance at a steady cost and still provide good health insurance for our employees. So we're seeing no increase predicted this year. All of our property insurance in the city of Havelock went up by 25%. Our workers' comp, which is state control, went up by 15%. We do what's called a contingency, and I'll explain to you why we do one real quick. When fuel started, turning into this huge scale of up and down probably a decade ago, the board started creating a fuel contingency because you would budget for fuel for the year, and then fuel would go up to $4 a gallon now, and we were running out of money in the fuel line items in all of our departments. So what we ended up doing was a few years ago, we stopped doing it as a fuel-specific contingency, and we made it just a general contingency that the manager controls. And so the board puts money in that contingency fund, and then throughout the year, the manager can use it to cover things like fuel shortages or fuel money shortages because prices have skyrocketed. Or if you end up on a special project and there's some change order that was not a part of the project, the board can authorize the manager to spend, say, $5,000 out of that to cover the overage. That's what we use the contingency for. It is, because it's already budgeted, it is way faster than having to call the board together and have a meeting about, say, a $5,000 change on a contract. The manager can email that out. The board has already given him the authority to spend it, and he knows what his kind of parameters are. They took a deep dive into what they've had to spend on a contingency for the last several years, and in order to shave some money out of the budget, we've been doing $100,000 because there were years we needed that much. The last few years, the manager has not used that much. For example, this year, we've used basically $34,000 out of the contingency fund to date. And that's where we kind of expect to end up over the next month. So they cut the budget for contingency to $25,000 from what it used to be, which was $125,000. Now, what does that mean? It means we're not accounting for that on the tax rate in the budget. So if something comes up above $25,000, we're gonna have to call a special meeting or wait till the next meeting in order to have, to allocate money to the manager to handle some special issue. But we feel like the risk level is pretty low there, so that was a place that the board could cut some of the money out of the budget, so they did. Okay, we can come back to these slides if or when you guys have questions. Okay? This one is a fund reserve trend chart. And so I say fund reserve is just, it's government and accounting speak for your savings account. And we do call them different things depending on the account. If you look at the very top line, which is kind of the dark purple, that one is what we call general fund. So that's your tax rate dollars. That is what you get from sales tax, property tax, motor vehicle tax, rentals of picnic shelters, planning and inspection permits, things like that. That goes in what's called the general fund, which you saw this year about a $15.5 million fund for general fund. We got pretty high in our general fund in 2021, and we've spent some money out of that. Now, board philosophy on how we spend money out of the general fund, we try to do it just like you would do it at home, which means we don't make the house payment out of your savings account, right? You make that out of the money you actually get from revenue. Your savings account is for one-time purchases. So for us at our house, maybe your HVAC goes out. That's why you have a savings account. But for us, it would be like a fire truck. Or usually it's a piece of equipment. It's a great example. Or this year, we're buying new defibrillators, AED machines for the ambulances at $74,000. We won't have to buy that machine again for approximately 5 to 8 years. So that's what we use that general fund for. We make those one-time, we call them one-time purchases. You will make it again, but it's long periods of time in between, not back to back to back. So our general fund is reasonably healthy. We're just under $8 million. I think that's at 7.6. Is that what it represents? $7,721,912 is what we expect that to be June 30th. Now, you might think that sounds like a lot of money. The board tries to balance around 50%. So that means if our budget's $15.5 million, you should have half of that in your savings account. The reason we do that, and I'll just back you up to 2018, Hurricane Florence In less than a month, we spent $4 million out of our savings account just like that. Gone. And so, because we live on the coast, you'll see most coastal communities do keep a higher general fund balance. You go into a center of the state, they may have a 32% general fund balance because they don't deal with hurricanes that can wipe their account out. So, for example, in 2018, you can see in 2018, we were just below $8 million. We spent half of that money in a month. We get that money back, typically. It took 3.5, 4 years to get that money back. So that means you have to operate with a decreased amount of funds. Plus, any grant we get, I know it's already get more grants, get more grants. Well, we've gotten over $20 million worth of grants in the last 2 years. But every grant, almost, you have to pay for up front. So if it's a $3 million grant, we have to spend $3 million, then they reimburse us for our account for spending that. So that's why we keep that money in the general fund. The light blue line you see is sewer. And while we trended pretty even there for a while, you can see that we have tanked very rapidly in the last year. It is no surprise to any of you that we have been spending copious amounts of money on our sewer system. Sewer issues typically don't come in 4 figures. They rarely come in 5 figures. Sewer problems are 6 figures and above. For example, the sewer line you see getting replaced along Highway 70 starting at Annunciation. It's going under the Ford dealership where you see all the equipment now. That was supposed to be a $3.2 million project. By the time we're done with all the change orders, issues, property acquisitions, we're going to spend right at $6 million on that project. That's what sewer costs. So because of that tanking blue line right there is partly why you see the increase in what we need to be charging for sewer. Okay, the yellow line is water. Some of you will remember in approximately 2017, we started something called a water capital reserve fee of now it's $10.50. I think when it started it was $7 or $8. That money went directly into our retained earnings to build up that account because it was way too low. It was a very high level of risk. We've been successful at doing that. And even though we've maintained the water system at a high level, we've been able to grow that account. The bottom one, the kind of regular purple one, is Powell funds. Powell funds are money that is given to us from the state of North Carolina, collected from your gas tax. Gas tax, when we pump gas at the pump, that 39 cents, whatever it is, I don't remember exactly. The state collects that. They then send us back a portion. It's based on a formula that is done based on miles of roads and population. And they send us an amount. This year we got $450,000. Is that right? 470?
Around $464,000
this year. That's what the state gives us to maintain our roads. Flash back a couple slides. We have way more miles of roads than we can handle with $460,000. It's not even a drop in the bucket. So the Powell Fund, when we get it, we do use it for road work, drainage work, all the things that the state allows us to. But we do carry a small reserve account in Powell for things like major paving breaks or something like that. Our account now is roughly $500,000 is all it is, which you could do that in paving. We can spend that tomorrow. Okay? Budget year trends. And so we like to show year to year. The only reason I don't like showing year to year is because it's really not apples to apples. We do show it for a comparison. But for example, if you get a grant, that money shows in your total number. So you could get a $3 million grant, you're like, oh my gosh, you got $3 million extra dollars. Well, we just had grants. So then you'll see the number come back down the following year. A lot of times also with delayed FEMA money, we'll spend a bunch, and then you get it back 3 years later, and your general fund number jumps up, but it's because you received money back on a prior year. But just for example, in 22-23, our budget was roughly $14.8 million. Our total was $26 million. You'll see in 23-24 that went up to $31 million. There's a lot of grants and allocations included in that huge jump. This year, our proposed budget comes back down to $27.5 million with $15.8 in your general fund. You see 3.3 in water, 5.7 in sewer. For the most part, from year to year, if we do it, if you want a copy of the audit, it's fascinating reading it about that thick. But there are much more specific graphics in there that show a longer graph of what your total general fund expenditures look like. And it always looks like a mountain range. And that's because, like I said, if you get grants, that number's going to jump. Then it'll come back down when you expend it. Okay. This is appropriations. So appropriations is what we spend out of that savings account. It's how much money we plan to spend out of the savings account. So that'd be one-time ticket items. So the general fund this year, the board has planned to spend, as proposed, to spend $476,000 out of that $7.7 million. And that is all equipment and capital items. So for example, one of the items in that list is a police car. We haven't bought a police car. We've got 7 that are at 100,000 miles. Our emergency vehicles, the board typically directs staff to start letting us know when we're hitting that 100,000 and just over number, because they ride them really, really hard. At that point, they start failing, and we need those vehicles to be 100% reliable every day. So this year we've got 7 that are hitting 100,000 miles. Next year there will be 9 predicted. So the board's buying 1 police car this year to put into the fleet. We have a fire truck, not a pumper truck, but a fire expedition that the captain and the fleet use to respond to vehicles, that has almost 30,000 miles on it, that is planned to be replaced in that. What we typically do in that case, just so you know, is that Ford Expedition has been ridden hard for, I don't know how many years, 7 years? I don't remember how old it is, Tom. I just know it has 130,000 miles on it. And at some point, you get to the point where your garage is telling you you probably shouldn't be using this as a first responder vehicle anymore, but it would still work day to day for, say, the rec department or public works to use for an inspection vehicle, because it's going to drive 4 miles a day. And if it broke down on the way to an inspection, you could catch a ride from somebody else and you could tow the vehicle in. It's a whole different scenario than when they're responding to an emergency and it breaks down on the way. So typically, for example, those vehicles that we replace, we give the manager the authority to decide what to do with those vehicles, and he can pass them down through the fleet, and the department heads will decide who needs a vehicle, and they move them around that way as a hand-me-down vehicle. Or if they're at a point where we feel like they're not worth maintaining at any level, the board policy is we fill the vehicles. So they go on an auction site to be auctioned off, and anybody in the world can bid on them. And every now and then we do that, and people buy the vehicles and then get it. Typically, by the time they're going to go deals, they're not worth much. Right? We have run them into the ground. It's like a $2,000 vehicle, but it is some revenue for the city. The power bill, we're not expecting to spend any of that $500,000 this year. I'll talk about that in a second when we talk about paving. Water, $293,000 out of retained earnings. That is for capital outlay projects within the water fund. And just a reminder, they're all listed separately because they do have to all be treated separately. The general fund is your tax dollars. Your water and your sewer, your 911, your Powell, your water and sewer especially are treated as enterprise funds, which means they're supposed to be run as a business. The revenue that comes in from your utility bill is supposed to cover all the expenses and depreciation and capitalization, just like any other business would. And E911, we do have $97,000 that we're going to spend out of that money that we have in E911, but again, those are for very, very specific purposes for emergency responding. It's approved by the state in order to be spent. So a total of $866,000 spent out of all of our savings accounts. Revenue, we've got a 31% increase for state shared and collected. Oh no, this is our breakdown of revenues for the general fund. 31% is the state shared and collected income, which is, like I said earlier, your franchise fees or sales tax. 3% Powell bill, that's how much money we're going to get to do our roads from the state from that gas tax. 50% of our budget for general fund comes from your property and motor vehicle tax. 50% of our budget is property and motor vehicle tax. 16% comes from fees, permits, contributions, and fund balance. So fees, for example, building permits, or now our fire marshal, our inspection fees that commercial places will be paying, or if you rent this facility, or this is the general fund, but if you rent a picnic shelter, if you rent an amphitheater, anything like that, that's where that money is, 16% from there. Our expenditures, 71% of our expenditures are personnel, 25% are operations, 4% capital outlay. The 4% capital outlay number is low. It's been lower. Every year our capital outlay has been 1% or less. It's hard to maintain a fleet of vehicles, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of buildings, and do that on less than 10% capital outlay. But that's typically, just to be honest, that's typically where you're going to cut items when you start trying to balance a budget. you were gonna replace an HVAC system, but it's still working, so you say, take it out of the budget when it breaks, call us, and we'll buy you an HVAC system. So that's typically why capital outlay is lower. It's, you know, what we affectionately call deferred maintenance. Next one. Okay, I don't know if y'all can all read this. I'll give you the highlights. This is an overview of both departmental and VOC budget cuts. I told you when they first put a budget together, November, December, into January timeframe, that budget is massive. And that's everybody's needs. And then staff starts cutting, and then when the board gets it, the board cuts. So if you look down at the bottom, the general fund cuts as of May 8th, which was before the board got it. Staff themselves cut $1.9 million out of the budget. The board has cut another almost $600,000 for a grand total of $1.388 million that the board has cut out of the budget. So that's a mix of things. That could be everything from capital outlay, like the HVAC unit I just talked about, or not buying a truck that we need to replace, not buying a backhoe. It could also be, and it is things like training. You know, you cut a little bit of training from every department to try to balance the budget. It could be education. It could be computer equipment that Chad and IT had prepared to replace this year, but they said you need one more year out of this computer, so you cut a few $1,000s there. That's how you get it. And if you go through all these, if you can read them, you'll see it's by group. So the governing body cut $800 out of their budget, admin 22, IT 150,000. I'm sure Chad would love to tell you exactly what got cut out of IT, but it's typically things like replacements of servers or things like that we're going to take the risk and try to go one more year instead of replacing it right now. So that's just kind of a highlight of some of the budgets, all right? Or budget cuts, excuse me. Okay, water fund and sewer fund. The water fund, just to talk about how it's made up, every bit of your water fund is revenue from the water meter. Every bit of the water fund is revenue from the water meter. It's what we all pay for water. Expenditures, 27% of that is personnel, 65% of that is operations. And if you compare that, for example, to the general fund we just talked about, you can see the personnel number is much higher, operations lower. In this case, you're running a water plant and a whole bunch of lines and water towers. So your operations is going to be a little higher, and your capital outlay on that, 8%, a little bit higher. When you look at sewer expenditures, 15% personnel, that is a very few people doing a whole lot of work. Operations, 84%, costs a lot of money to run a sewer plant and keep it within DEQ specifications. Then 1% capital outlay, that is planned outlay. Every year we spend, I shouldn't even say it, knock on wood, but every year, whatever we plan for capital outlay for sewer always gets tripled and quadrupled. We end up spending millions of dollars on breaks on lines underground that are from the 60s and 70s that you don't anticipate. Now, if you look at the revenue part, proposed right now, the water fund will be adjusted by 10% for usage, and the sewer fund by 25%. Yes, so here is what a typical water bill would look like. So right now, if you're using 5,000 is the average in Havelock, between 5,000 and 6,000. So it would go about $25 a month. And then 2,000 on the lower side, a little bit less, 9,000, which very few residential customers use 9,000. The average family of 4, my house, for example, we use between 5,000 and 6,000 gallons every month. All right? So here's a comparison of water rates. And I'm just going to throw out, I've said this before, and some of you have been in the listening sessions. I've been saying this for a year and a half in listening sessions, longer than that outside. Water and sewer across the state and the country has been artificially deflated for decades. It costs way more to provide water and sewer than any municipality or county actually charges for it. And that catches up with you over time, which we've seen happen with our sewer department. So what we did was to try to figure out where we actually are on our water bill, because, and we can talk about the utility bill later if you'd like to, it has everything on it. This is what actual water cost last year. So in Havelock, if you had 6,000 gallons, which by the way is on the high side for most homes, If you use 6,000 gallons in Havelock, your flat rate is $14, which means your flat rate is what you pay if you don't use a single drop. Like you go out of town for a month, you come back, you pay $14 for water. And then it's tiered after that for usage, right? So if you used 6,000 gallons in a month for water, this year you paid $34.83. That's what you pay for. If you look at municipalities and counties around us, well, actually, let's go one line above that. And the green is without the capital reserve fee. That's not counting the $10.50. But if you go up, obviously, with the capital reserve fee for water, you pay $45.33. That includes that capital reserve, and that's really the whole picture. So I want you to look at the places around us. If you look at New Bern, if it's the green line, you live in town in New Bern, you pay $41.47. Ours was $45.33. If you look at New Bern outside city limits, which is a vast majority of theirs, you paid $81.27 for water. This is not the utility bill, that's water. If you go to Newport, and you're under Utilities Incorporated, you paid $90.75 last year for water. Your flat rate is $40.25 in Newport. You paid $90.25 to use 6,000 gallons. If you go to Johnston County, or let's go to Moorhead first, in Moorhead City, 6,000 gallons, you paid $38.79 if you weren't even there all month, and you paid $80.03 for 6,000 gallons of water. Now I'm just going to back up. In Havelock, with your capital reserve, you only pay $45. If you look at Johnston County, and you might wonder why Johnston County's on the list. So the top ones up there that say actual bill, if you can read that, that was employees of ours that have water bills from other jurisdictions that volunteered to give them to us so we can actually have a real comparison of what 6,000 gallons costs. This is not theoretical. That's an actual bill for water. Johnston County, we have that one, and that one just got taken over by a third-party provider, which is the new trend. And when third-party providers come in to take over your water or sewer system because you sell it to them, most of the time rates double or triple immediately because to actually run it, our rates are way too low. In Johnston County, 6,000 gallons, you have a $19 flat rate, similar to ours, but 6,000 gallons of water costs you $53. And that's a county providing the water. Counties typically can be cheaper than municipalities because they have more customers and have one system that provides to those customers, which that's just a volume calculation, right? And so typically counties are on the lower side and we're less expensive than they were this year. So we did this to illustrate water because I will remind everybody, you get a utility bill, not a water bill. People say, I get water, my water bill is $150. Your water bill is not $150. For water, you actually paid less than everybody in Eastern North Carolina last year. Everybody. Sewer, we can't do this the same way because sewer is not apples to apples. When you look at sewer is always a calculation of water. Even if you get your water from somewhere else and you get your sewer from a different company, it's always a calculation, and everyone uses a different formula. So you can't do sewer the exact same way because it's just not apples to apples. All right, next slide, Chad. So before we jump on solid waste and stuff, I'll just add, in thinking about the water rates, and I'll come back to this, the board chose to change the flat rate in order to get rid of the capital reserve fees. And so you would see on your new bill proposed, no capital reserve fee for water, no capital reserve fee for sewer. Those would go away. All right, solid waste. This is your trash pickup. The bulk of that is a contract that we have with GFL. That's your blue can that you roll out one time a week, 96 gallons gets picked up no matter what you put in. Also, the solid waste fund picks up the green waste, your white goods, your appliances when you put them out, and your brown goods, so your couches, that kind of stuff when you put on the side of the road. That's what that pays for. It's what we typically call our slow and steady fund because it's a very simple fund. The majority of it is a contract. As long as we use a rate adjustment that matches the contract change, that account just continues on. This year that'd be 7.5%. It's 31% personnel, 69% operating. That's equipment and tipping fees, right? So the knuckle booms you see, the compactor trucks, the utility trailers, and then, of course, our tipping fees that we have to pay. The 7.5% hopefully will cover the tipping fees. We've been told tipping fees at the landfill will change this year, but we have not been told what they're gonna change to. So we've chosen 7.5% to try to accommodate for both the contract change and for those tipping fees. Tourist Center, which is the building you are in, it's roughly a $607,000 a year expense. We do run this as an enterprise fund like water and sewer. So the revenue from the building it's run like a business. We get the revenue, and then that revenue goes directly to operating the business. 30% is rent and services for our income. 15% is occupancy tax. We participate in an occupancy tax practice with the Tourism Development Authority of Craven County. We get $97,000 every year to come here from occupancy tax that goes directly to the Tourist Event Center to support this building. If we have an incredible amount of hotel rentals, we can get more than that. It's kind of like I would say a waterfall, but it's really a geyser. It's more up than down. But if we hit certain metrics within our hotels, then we can get more than $97,000. That's only happened maybe one time in the last 15 years. It doesn't happen often. But we get our $97,000. That's the 15% you see. 55% other. That could be all kinds of things, to include a general fund appropriation. So this building, and we talk about this all the time, does not support itself. No convention center in North Carolina supports itself. The only ones that do make a profit are typically attached to the hotel and owned by the same owner. The hotel makes the money, the convention center is a byproduct. This building's not really here to make money. If we break even, we're pretty happy. Usually we're allocating somewhere in the neighborhood of about $200,000 a year-ish, from year to year, to the Tourist and Event Center to cover expenses not covered by rentals. In some years that's been more. You think about COVID years, we were shut down after Hurricane Florence because we had so much flood damage and rain damage in here. Obviously we had to put more money to that from the general fund. COVID year, we had very massive impact to our revenue, so we had to pay more. This year's been a pretty good year. The revenue's been good. We've got a lot of rentals, so it'll be a little bit less. So it kind of moves like that. Expenditures, 48% is personnel, 48% is operating, 4% capital outlay. The 48% operating includes our exhibits. That's the airplanes out front that have to get painted regularly. That's all of our exhibits inside that have to be maintained. Just a side note, maybe interesting but irrelevant. We don't own the airplanes. We don't own most of this stuff that's on exhibit. It's all loaned from us from either Quantico, from the Marine Corps, or Pensacola. And so they actually own that gear. We're just caretakers of it. So they come every year and they inspect it all. We have to keep it and maintain it at a certain level. And so that's part of that expense as well. And within that, I guess the ECAP budget probably is in that as well, for the exhibit upkeep. Okay. This is our debt trend. We always like to show this. This will be a part of the presentation at the public hearing as well, just to show what kind of debt the city has. From an auditor perspective, we have incredibly low levels of debt in the city of Havelock. I don't even like to say out loud the number, so I try to forget it. Of what we're allowed to borrow as a city is staggering. The number that the state would allow us to borrow, we are well below that threshold. We've paid some debt off over the last, I'm gonna say decade, but I would say the last 6 years aggressively, and then some things that have just come due. Most of the stuff you'll see here has a trend, winner, USDA. USDA, because we are a benefit of being able to use their lending process or granting process. You can see the interest rates are incredibly low. When you start talking USDA, they're always fixed, and they'll give you a longer term. Most of the stuff you'll see here is huge dollar amounts. That outfall line project was originally an $11 million project for our sewer system that we got at 4.5% interest. We paid, and you can see over here what our annual payment is on each one. The next one that'll come off from us will be in 2030, which is the Quint. That was that's the, I call it a really, really big fire truck with a pattern on top. We call it the Quint. I actually don't know why it's called Quint. We call it Quint, but I'm sure there's a reason. Probably how many gallons it holds, I don't know. But it's got the big ladder on top, and it's the massive truck. Those things now are well into the millions of dollars to purchase. We're gonna have to buy another one in a few years. We've been kind of sort of planning for that, at least incrementally. But this is the last one we want. That'll go off in 2030. The rest of these are huge. You see the City Hall rebuild, the Fire EMS West End building, which still has $2.8 million on it. The Senior Center, which, I mean, the Senior Center, for example, that money was borrowed from the USDA in like 2004. And so that's what our debt looks like. Tax rate, the budget is balanced right now with a tax rate of 0.71. The board has proposed a 3-cent tax increase, and the 3-cent tax increase includes two things really. The firefighter EMT positions that you saw at the beginning, increased taxes to cover that, and the building inspector 3 position, which we're required to have. Those two add up to 2 cents. Actually, add up to 2.055 cents on the tax rate. The other penny that the board is proposing is to put towards our general fund for paving. That 1 cent, the 3rd cent would be put directly towards paving, as is proposed right now.
Directly towards what?
Paving.
Paving.
Yes, towards our paving projects, yes ma'am. 1 cent of tax rate, we usually like to put this number up there just so people have a reference. When we change the tax rate by a penny, when the board says raise taxes by a penny or cut taxes by a penny or whatever, or we say firefighter EMTs and a building inspector costs 2 pennies, what does that mean? 1 penny, when we change 1 penny on the tax rate, the city of Havelock in total gets $98,000. That's what we get for that penny. And if we look at average residential house value, that's 194 this year. If you remember back at the beginning, I mentioned it was 159. This year, the county is saying our average value is 194. So just to translate what a penny means to an average house now. A penny is 1 penny per 100 of evaluation. So if you have a $194,000 home, then a penny should be about $20 on your tax bill. So if you raise your taxes by a penny, it's $19 and change. $19.41. So when you see a 3-cent tax increase, if your house is worth less than $194, it's going to be less than that. If your house is worth more than $194 on the tax value, it'll be more than that. But if you're at the average, we can only pick one, so we pick the average. Interestingly, we just found out last year we're the only municipality that does that to try to find what it actually means to a citizen. Most of them do it on the total ad valorem, which means you're really looking at your commercial. We try to dial it into what it actually affects our citizens and their homes. So that's why that number is there. We get the county to create that number for us every year. So 3 cents, for example, if you have an average home, is $60 a year. All right, permit fees increase generally by 3.9%. Also moving some permits around to make them clearer for citizens and for contractors and developers and business owners when they come in. There's some fee schedule and language changes involved in that. Utility rates, as we talked about, water adjusted by 10%, sewer adjusted by 25%. Your capital reserve fees on water and sewer would then be eliminated. So right now, your capital reserve fees for water and sewer are $10.50 and $12 for sewer. Make sure I'm saying a lot of numbers, but I should get them right. $10.50 right now is what you pay for water, $12 for sewer. That's $22.50. Those will be eliminated. Your rates would be adjusted to actually operate the system, which is your $25 increase, which means there's really only a net increase of $3 to water and sewer.
Is that combined? Sorry, is that combined? Because you keep on saying water going $25 more. Does that include sewer? Sewer's going to be different.
That would include sewer, yes, sir.
Okay, all right, thanks.
And then your solid waste adjustment, like we just talked about, 7.5% to accommodate both the contract and tipping fees, so that we can still pick up all the trash and manage the contract that we do. All right? Now here's what's coming up. Public hearing on June 3rd at 7 p.m. at City Hall. That is the official state required public hearing. And I say that because this is not the public hearing. This is just a listening session to try to get people thinking about the budget and to get input. The actual public hearing will be June 3rd. We will basically present a lot of the exact same information again in a televised formal meeting, and citizens will have, during that public hearing, speak just about the budget if they would like to. Budget workshop, we have another one scheduled June 10th. The reason we schedule another budget workshop is 2 reasons. One, because the board gets input today, potentially with your questions and thoughts. They also will get that at the public hearing and from citizens and interested parties for the next month. So we always schedule a final workshop so the board can sit down, take public input, reevaluate any new information that's come in. Like, say for example, we hear the state's going to make a policy change and we know that's going to happen. That gives us a workshop to try to adjust for that. That one is scheduled for June 10th from 6 to 9. At workshops, you're always welcome to come, just like all our other work. That's where the sausage is made. There's no public comment section, but you can hear everything the board's talking about, and certainly talk to us before and after the meeting. Budget adoption again will be June 24th, so the budget could be effective July 1. All right, that's a lot. It's a lot to cover. And I guess, probably back up a few slides, Chad, and let's leave it on that one for now. So that I can I'll answer any questions anybody has. And here's what I'll say. If you have a question or comment, we'd love for you to walk up to the mic. We do want people that are watching from Facebook Live right now that couldn't be here to be able to hear your question when I answer it, and other people in the room. So the mic's fired up, so you can hear, so people can hear what you have to say. So if you have a question, comment, and you'd like to come up, feel free.
These slides are online right now, so if you can't see that, go online right now.
Okay, so, you're eliminating the $22 fees.
Yes,
right?
ma'am. $20.50. Yes, ma'am.
But you're adding 25 plus 10% plus 7.5% rates on our monthly bills. So if you have a $130 bill, your increase, that's with no fees. Well, if you did the fees, it would be $55 minus the $22, so it's a $33 increase in your monthly bill.
20,
Right.
back up to that slide, Chad. So depending on usage.
I'm just saying, if your water bill, and if your usage in sewers is $100, make it easy, $100. You're gonna and that's what you've paid in the past. You're gonna increase that $100 by, what did I say, 32.5%. And if you take away the $22, we're gonna be paying out the wazoo.
So, kind of, and the only thing I would say is each one is applied separately. So if you apply 32% to 100, that's a different number than if you apply each one separately. And so the 10% does go just to the water, and that depends on what you use. The 25% goes just to sewer, and the 7.5 goes just to solid waste.
What was the solid waste a month now?
Solid waste right now, 2150,
So what will it be?
2311.
2311. It just seems like you're making it more difficult on people that are retired to live here. You're talking about increasing the property tax. Those all got increased last year because of upping the value of the homes, which is ridiculous because these homes aren't worth what they're saying. And then our, what is it, the one you pay with your driver, with the license?
Motor vehicle tax,
What is that now?
$7.50. It does not change, it would be the same.
Per what?
Per 100 on your vehicle. So $7.50 for each vehicle. So if you have a car, truck, trailer,
That's
anything
what
that's
Cadillac charges.
right, $7.50.
That's okay. But yeah, I'm just saying, everything is increasing and it's really getting hard to live. That's all.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello, so my name's Eric. I live off Ironwood Drive with my wife and I have a 5-month-old. It's more just a comment in general. I was reading the proposed budget. Of course, I'm a little bit partial to the fire department. The fire department listed a statistic that 783 times there was level 0, which means that City of Havelock is unable to provide an effective emergency response every year, 783 times a year.
Correct.
292 times a human being placed a 911 call and they didn't receive a City of Havelock ambulance fire response, the primary response was a mutual aid agency. Usually that mutual aid agency takes 5, 10, 15 minutes longer, long time to wait when you're not breathing, long time to wait when your house is on fire, long time to wait when your children are in trouble. I'm very appreciative that, of course, it's hard to have to foot these bills, hard to have to foot the increase in pay, but 3 firefighter EMTs go a long way. 783 times for somebody to have an emergency and not receive a response from the city that they are paying their money every year for, it's pretty bad. And unfortunately, these things cost money. Unfortunately, it does require a tax increase. I think, this is my personal feelings, I appreciate that the city is willing to realize that these are issues, these are important issues, and I think it's worth the tax increase. It is worth the tax increase to make sure that April 1st, a house fire occurred on 404 Shepherd Drive. Somebody's garage was fully engulfed, they lost a dog. I think it's worth to make sure that the next house fire receives more than one firefighter on the first engine that got there. Second engine had 3 people. Cherry Point had a bunch of people. The first fire engine that got there had 1 person. It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. It's not anybody's fault. It's not the fire department's fault. The fire department does what the fire department needs to do. Train, work hard, but they need people. People are what put out fires. People are what save people from heart attacks. People are what stops bleeding in the middle of the street from gunshots and car accidents. And I'm willing to foot the bill. I'm willing to foot the bill for the tax increase. And I appreciate that that's something that you guys have thought about, considered, and I think it's worth it.
Thank you, sir. While we're talking fire and EMT, I will add a couple things to what he said. He's right on the statistics. Over 700 times last year, we were what we call level 0, which means all of our personnel that can fight fire or do EMT work were out of pocket, meaning they were already on call. We didn't have anybody to send. That goes to mutual aid. Cherry Point mutual aids with us, and so do the townships around us. They're all further away. It takes them a lot longer to respond than the city. That's 2 times a day. 2 times every day that we can't field a call. What does that mean? It means our citizens get a lower level of service, and you're right, when somebody needs service from firefighters or EMTs, that's adding an extra 10 minutes is a long time. The other thing I would add is we also lose our revenue. So the way it works is we are not obligated to provide EMS service. That's actually the county's responsibility. We are a contractor for the Craven County in order to perform that, both in our township and Township 5, all the way down to Adams Creek Road in Harlow. And they pay us a modest amount to do that every year. But the way that we can make up for that is they don't take billing. We do. They give us the authority to do billing, so we contract with a third party. If you can pick up by one of our ambulances, they bill your insurance. Some of you probably have never even seen it, because if you have TRICARE or Blue Cross Blue Shield, they just pay that. And that money goes to our firefighter EMT, our department at EMS. If you don't have insurance, then you do get a bill. If you have Medicare, then Medicare picks up what they pick up, and you have to cover the difference. We're allowed to bill in order to make up that difference, and we do. And we bill within what's allowed by all those companies. The point I was going to make is every call that we don't get, because Cherry Point gets it, or a different township gets it, is one we also cannot bill for. So we get 0 revenue for that. If you get a ride from Cherry Point, you got a free ride because they're not allowed to bill you. If you got it from Newport, then Newport's the one that's going to bill you. So there is an increase. I would love to stand here and tell you that the increase in revenue that we're going to get by having another ambulance on the road is going to offset the cost of an officer. It might end up offsetting the cost of one, but it's not going to get all 3, right? It's not that kind of revenue, but it is revenue you're leaving behind, and money that you don't have to buy equipment and do safety training and all that kind of stuff. I also will add, in Havelock, our call volume is, and they're going to correct me if I get this wrong, but our call volume is the highest in the county. So our folks run more EMS calls, second highest, third highest, first, second. Newburgh runs more, but that's the hospital.
That's EMS.
Right, that's the hospital. So the hospital runs all of New Bern and Craven counties throughout out of the hospital. So as individual providers, let's say we're the highest, as not the hospital. We're the highest level of service calls. And as a result, when you have a small force like we do, there's a lot of turnover just because of the rhythm, the battle rhythm. They come in for 24 hours and they don't get a break. You can't run the number of calls we run in a week and then actually be able to eat or even sleep. And so what happens is we get folks, they're great, we train them, they stay with us for a few years, and then they don't want that battle rhythm anymore, and they punch out to go work at Moorhead or Emerald Isle, or I don't know, I'm making stuff up. But they go somewhere around us, they go to New Bern, they go somewhere where they don't have to run as hard as they do here. Ours are all firefighter and either EMT, paramedic, basic. So they do both things here. Some departments around us, that's not the case. And so you could leave and just do one job and not have to do the other one. Your battle rhythm drops significantly for the same amount of pay. The board choosing to hire 3 firefighter EMTs with a tax increase allows us to have more personnel to man their ambulance, reduce the number of zero-level calls where we are not able to respond, and change our shift structure so that we give a little bit of a break to the people that are actually working here so they're not burning out in 2 years and wanting to be back. Did I hit that pretty fair, Tom? Okay. Other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
I'll add one thing to that. You commented they leave here and they get basically less work for the same pay. They actually leave here and get less work for more pay.
Right. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the questions that I have. The water reserve and sewer reserve that's currently on the utility bill, you say you're gonna combine that into the rates. Were they shown as separate line items in the budget, and how are you gonna track that money to ensure that it's, because I thought those reserves were specifically for specific projects to have to do with water and sewer. So is that gonna be, are we gonna be able to see where that money is still being used for those projects?
Yes, ma'am. So the way it works now is they are separate items on your bill and they're
Right.
separate in our budget.
Right.
And they go directly, well, they're supposed to go directly into retained earnings. They
Right.
do. The
Okay.
problem is they typically get spent before we can save them,
Okay.
right?
Because I was under the impression that those reserves were put onto the utility bill so that when those projects were done, that they would eventually come off of the bill. But now that you're combining it into the cost of the water and the sewer, how is me as a citizen gonna know that you're using that money specifically for those projects?
So
If I'm
in-
looking at a budget.
So in the audit, it will show clearly what goes directly into the retained earnings.
Okay.
So the way it would work now is because it'll go into income, it'll go
Right.
into revenue, anything that we don't spend goes into retained earnings.
Okay,
So for example, the sewer one right now at $12 is $800,000 a year. That's what
Right.
that generates.
Right.
So if we spend $1 million, you may not have any go into retained earnings, which is actually
Right.
what happened this past year.
okay,
And we will just have it by line item in the future. You'll be able to see what
Okay.
goes into retained earnings. I
Okay.
think the original idea, you're right, was that one day those capital reserve fees may go away.
right,
What we've learned is because of the age and health of our system, they're
Right.
never gonna go away.
okay,
And so now having them as part of the flat rate, which is where we put
Right.
them, having them as part of the flat rate, not the tiered structure,
Right.
they're just a part of the flat rate,
right.
means they would just be forever provided for the capital in our system.
Okay, and the other question I have is about the solid waste you're talking about, garbage pickup, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So does Hadlock have a contract with GFL
Yes,
to
ma'am.
pick up our trash? Is there something in the contract that states when they're late picking up our garbage that they get penalized? Because that needs to be put in there, because it's become a problem to where we're getting 2-3 weeks in a row where our garbage is 1-2 days late in pickup. And it's getting to be ridiculous. And if I'm paying this much for garbage, my garbage should be picked up.
There is not a penalty that in the contract for that. I know that Patrick and his team talk to him regularly because of them
Right.
being late or not handling our trash.
Right. Right.
However, GFL told me just a month ago, we talked with GFL, they're buying new trucks. Part of the problem has been trucks have been down.
Right.
And personnel. They're having the same personnel issues as everyone. They think they're gonna have that solved. They told me and the manager about 3 weeks ago that they've got a whole bunch of new trucks coming online for the Newport station, which is where a lot of our
Right.
trucks come from.
Okay.
And that over the next few months, that'll actually solve that problem.
Okay.
Interestingly, they're actually gonna be, gas, like, LP trucks, not gasoline trucks.
Right.
So they burn less fuel and are more efficient, and hopefully we'll keep our contract from increasing.
Right.
But that is their solution right now.
Okay.
We don't renegotiate that contract for at least another year. I'm not 100% sure on the date, but it's at least another year before we renegotiate that
Because I was
contract.
just curious, does the city keep up with the number of days that there's a delay in the trash pickup? So that when you go to renegotiate, you possibly could put a penalty in there to say, if you don't pick up our trash on time, we're gonna, buck off $10,000 or whatever amount.
That's a good question. I don't know that do we track that officially, Patrick, or just anecdotally?
I mean, we get all the phone calls in the office, so we got a good idea of the amount.
So they log the calls. So they log the calls in an email
Okay.
history. I would say there's finer points in negotiating with GFL too, when we go into that, for example. When you have the Chili Festival, we have National
Yes.
Night Out, they provide all of that trash pickup, and we don't pay it. That's in the contract.
Right.
So, when you're negotiating a penalty for that, they say, well, then you got to pay for trash pickup.
Well,
here, so-
when we as citizens are having this increase, and I'm sitting there for 2 days with my trash can sitting out in front, with wind blowing and trash is all over the place because people are not taking care of their trash cans the way they should. I don't care about them giving me free trash at the Chili Festival. I want the trash picked up because I'm paying for it.
Sure, and
So,
I agree, and I would also add the 7.5% also applies not just to that contract, but to what we do as a city in picking up the white goods, brown goods, because that's all
right.
in that one.
Yeah, I understand that. I don't have an issue with that. I'm talking about the GFL, because I know you don't have anything to do with recycle, because that's through the county.
Yes, ma'am.
Because that's always been late too, but I'm more concerned about Hadlock with you increasing my rate again, as far as making sure my trash is picked up the way it should be picked up.
Okay.
So, I was just curious.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. She said the Yard Waste guys do a great job. Thank you. We agree. We think that we get quite a few comments. Thank you for that. That's right. That's our employees. They do take a lot of pride in what they do. We also are running a street sweeper now. While y'all are thinking about the next question, I don't know if y'all have seen it, but we used to have a contract for the street sweeper. They came in and tried to essentially double the contract a year ago, and I'll just be blunt and say they really weren't doing that great of a job for what we were paying. And so Patrick brought a proposal to the board last year where we could buy a truck, put an employee in the truck, and do a better job ourselves for less money than the contract, and we did that. And so this year, when you see our street sweeper, it's actually our City of Havelock street sweeper. And I think we've all noticed our curb and gutter neighborhoods on Highway 7 look a whole lot better now that our guys are doing it than before. So I also say that to say, if you have a curb and gutter neighborhood and they come through and you see stuff leaking out the back or it's not working right, you should definitely let us know, because that is now our employee and our vehicle that we can fix. Where we didn't have that control with the contractor that we had previously. What else? They do 70. I don't know how often. They do 70. I don't know what the schedule is. And if you wanted to know what the schedule was, we can get that for you, but we do 70, yes. 70 in all the neighborhoods that have curb and gutter, modern, more modern. If you live on my end of town where we have ditches, then we don't put a truck on down my street. But I would say like Stonebridge, parts of Wolf Creek, Tucker Creek, South Forest, those areas the truck comes through. All right, other questions? Yes, sir.
So understanding everything is getting more expensive, and you talked about all the grants you've been getting and all this other ways in order to bring revenue in. Just looking forward to see what the city commissioners are looking at for eventually trying to bring relief. What other revenue trying to bring in, sans tax and fee increases. What are the ways that the city's doing it, that the people do it, outside agencies, nonprofits? What are the other ways that eventually we could be bringing in more money in order to provide relief from this? Because as I was saying, everything is getting more expensive. So there's got to be a way. I know we're in ebb and flows, but how do we get back down into the troughs for the increase?
Sure, great question. I say great question because the answer is not real clear. So, one way we do it, and have done it for the last few years, is we've been very aggressive about grants and congressionally directed spending. And so, unfortunately, doesn't ever cover operations, but it will cover capital projects and drainage projects and things like that. When you get grants that do that, it does take pressure off of the operational fund because now you're not having to find that money to spend on the project, so then you can use the money for actual operations. So that's one way we do it. And we have been successful both with congressionally directed spending to the tune of $7.9 million last year and almost $20 million worth of grants in the last several years. But again, those are for specific projects only. The only other two ways to do it is increase revenue or decrease expenses. And so we do work very hard every year to try to eliminate expenses that do have an impact on the budget and become more efficient, which is another way to reduce expenses. Find ways to be more efficient at the water plant, at the sewer plant, to relieve those accounts, or more efficient in our operations as a PD or public works, or cut expenses. And at some point, you do get to a point, the board's having these hard discussions for the last 2 years. Are you willing to cut a service and not increase costs? And, not buying computers and not paying for training only comes up with, almost decimal dust, it's going to really pain at you every year. When you start talking about whole entire departments, like what could you do differently? And last year, we had a full-on presentation of what would it look like to cut major departments and how that would work and how that could save you money. And the truth is, it's not a lot. And I'll use one that the board beat up this year really, really hard again, which was animal control. Animal control it's a redundant service. The county provides animal control. It's their responsibility. We have provided animal control in Seattle for as long as I can remember. It costs you as citizens, us as citizens, $125,000 a year. That's what it costs. That's one employee, and then I call partial. So you've got part-times that work in there. So one in a piece employees. You've got a truck that is outfitted to the most current standards with the air conditioning box and all that. And then that little building that we've got behind City Hall, where we use as an animal shelter. Really, it's less of a shelter, more of an animal control center. But that's only I say only because it's $125,000. If we cut the entire department, it saves you not even 1.2 cent on your tax rate. And then operationally, we're no longer going to be doing animal control. The county's going to have to respond, which means you've got incredible wait times for them to respond because they're already stressed. And then your operational officers, just a reminder, you have 26 sworn officers in the entire city of Havelock, total, not on one shift, total for all 3 shifts. And now you'll be adding an operational component to them that they don't have to worry about now. Animal control handles that for 125. Our officers are fortunate they don't, unless there's an emergency attack of an animal, they need to go put an animal down or something, they're not involved in animal control. You take it away, now they are going to be involved a lot more day to day, so it's stress the department. But those are the kinds of things we talk about for, if you're going to cut, how do you cut? You cut redundant service. We think the level of service would drop so bad that we feel like it's not worth cutting that penny. We'd all rather pay what amounts to $23 a year to know that we have animal control services. Plus our folks for $125,000 do a pretty freaking great job, I think, for such a small budget. And so those are the things we talk about. We've talked about shutting the building down. What does it look like to just eliminate the whole tourist and event center? It's $200,000 a year that we supplement with the general fund, but you got to get all these exhibits back to Quantico, Pensacola. That's going to cost money. You got to tear the building down. You got to at least keep it climate controlled. What do you do with your memorial guard? We go through those exercises in ways to try to cut expenses. Most of them become too painful, and they're not. The board is not willing to make those cuts. I don't know what future revenues we may have that will help it not be on citizens. The only thing I can say is the thing we are missing in Havelock that will help in the next 5-6 years is development. So cities around us that have land for development are not having to increase tax rates as much because they're getting new development. The new development is adding to their tax base. We have seen very minor tax-based development. A lot of that is geographics. There's nowhere in Havelock to build a 350 home residential complex like a building in Newport and Heritage Square. There's nowhere in Havelock to do that. We're bordered by the Croton National Forest, the base, and water. So with the bypass opening up the end of this year, it does open up a huge section of property down Lake Road that Weyerhaeuser owns, and they are actively meeting with our folks and have been for years, and even increased that recently, where they will be building all kinds of different homes. There'll be some mixed use, maybe commercial, some maybe even industrial out there. That will increase our tax base because they want to annex to get water and sewer. So they'll annex voluntarily, and we'll receive that benefit. That will offset us having to go to all of us that are been paying the bill all these years and say we gotta have more, because you'll have new people paying bills. We have the same opportunity at the end of the bypass by Stately Pines. That's called Otterwood on the I guess north side of the road, and it's really the east side, but on that side of the road, and then there's another one on the other side, both of which will come online probably a little bit later. We think Weyerhaeuser is going to be first, but they'll come on, say, in the next 8 years, 9 years, and that will be an additional hundreds of homes coming into our tax base. That's really what you've got to have if you don't want to become what we colloquially call a bedroom community, where you have no more development left, and as a result, all of us just continue to have to pay those bills. Because I understand your bills are, and remember, reminder, everyone on the board has to pay the same bills you do every month and every year for taxes and water and sewer and all that. We all pay the bill as well. And when we end up not having development, not having a way to increase that tax base with commercial, then you end up as a bedroom community. We always have to continue to pay those bills year after year after year. So that's the other piece. And we know that will happen. We wish we had a crystal ball that could say exactly when. We think Weyerhaeuser is probably in the next 3 years. We think we'll be receiving tax dollars on that in the next 3 years. Obviously, it's a guess, could be 5. We think 3. We think Otterwood might be more like 8 or 10. But it could go faster. You never know what developer is going to buy when Highway 70 bypass is done, and they'll accelerate, just like they're doing at Thurman Road. Y'all have all seen the construction up there, where a developer bought that, and they're putting in 200 and something homes, right, Brenda? 200 some homes right there. That same thing could happen to Otterwood when the construction is done. Unfortunately for us, all that property really is available, but only becomes available when the bypass construction is done. So kind of waiting on DOT. And that'll kind of flip that switch where we will see some hopefully new development. That's a long answer because it's kind of unclear, but that's the best answer I think I can give. Yes, sir. Other questions or comments or thoughts? Danny? True. So Danny said if I want to give you the bigger economic development picture, I can, which is, I talk around the trough on the aircraft, with our number of aircraft in squadrons right now, but our first F-35 squadron active, our first operational squadron arrived last year, the second one's arriving this year. We're getting 4 more after that, we'll have 6 squadrons in there, F-35s. Those numbers will steadily climb back up. So folks buying houses in the area will be ramping up at the same time that we're getting these new housing developments built. So they hopefully will buy a house in Havelock, not in Newport, not in Moorhead, not in Newburgh, not in Longleaf Pines, not in Cabana, right? We'll have the inventory here. It'll all happen at the same time. And also the advantages at FRC East, which they're predicting potentially another 1,000 jobs over the next 4 or 5 years. And those are all average salary of just over $70,000 a year of folks that will be working right here in Havelock. And again, that will all coincide with our inventory coming available so they can buy houses right here in town that is a modern house. Let's just be honest. I bet over half of us here live in a house that is not the modern floor plan, right? Only a few of you in here live in Tucker Creek, right? And maybe South Forest is a most modern of the other ones. But like you and I, Tony, we live in houses that are old school floor plan. And it's because that's the inventory in Havelock. Why do people buy Longleaf Pines and Heritage Square in Newport? Because driving 5 miles to get a house that has a master suite on one end, an open space in the middle, and the other bedrooms on the other end, like every other modern house is what people want. And they will drive 10 miles to get that before they'll buy a ranch-style house with 1.5 baths and a non-open floor plan. That's just the reality of today. Unfortunately, that's 95% of our inventory. If a house goes on the market in Tucker Creek, it is sold in a week. You have to fight for it. If you want one in Stonebridge, and they're not even super modern, you got to fight for those. If you want one in hour into town, an hour into town, Tony, you got a month, 2 months maybe even, unless it's a super special house that's been recently remodeled, you've got a little bit of time. It's still gonna sell in a month or two, but it's gonna sell a lot slower because it's really the last resort. I gotta live in Havelock, I can't get one in Tucker Creek, I'm gonna take this kind of cool 1975 house, right? And so, because it's got a bigger yard, I'll take the bigger yard, and I'll accept that and say, but I can't have the house I want, I'm gonna do some remodeling. That's our inventory, that's reality. So, to Danny's point, the economic development piece that will be kind of a life raft for us is all this development happening while those jobs are coming online, while those Marines and their families and sailors are coming back to Cherry Point, and all that being available so they want to buy in Havelock, not in Newport or Warwick. Because right now we make it hard. I don't say we, it's not the board. We don't build houses, right? That's not what we do. But Havelock does not make it easy for people to live in Havelock. You have to want to live in Havelock. I'm just being honest.
Gray Fox is great. They did a good job.
Gray Fox, they did a great job on the road, she said, Patrick. It does look great.
Yeah.
It does look great. That was a grant. That was a grant they did the Gray Fox project. All right, other questions or discussion? I could go all night. It's 8:30. Yes, sir.
The unfunded priority list, so like, of course, one to approve the public building inspector and the 35 MHEs. Is there any other things in that list that they're looking heavily at adding to the budget, or is it kind of like get where we want to cap it out? How does the commissioner feel, or the city manager feel?
Great question.
Added police officer, added 2 medics, added maintenance instructor.
Great question. So, and we didn't cover that. We try to go into listening sessions and public hearings with your max budget. Because the board does not want to surprise citizens, right? So this is what they feel like this is what they're going to spend. Now, if you get me today and you're like, I want this position, well, the board will go back and talk about adding something to the budget. But I would say, if anything, this budget would not go up, it would come down. Things would be cut out of it. Just to give an example of things that you said unfunded priorities, very military term, we talk about the UPO all the time, but for us, we talk about from an employee perspective, some employees that are not getting funded this year that staff really wants, and I think probably need, they just don't meet the priority, is another police officer, which was requested this year and not funded. It was kind of sort of funded, and the board went back and forth and ended up not funding it. Rec maintenance worker, we maintain all 12 of those parks, a 50-acre complex, all the buildings associated with 7 people, and only 2 of those are in the field. The rest are rec attendants or work at the senior or run the senior center, and so they really need another rec maintenance worker in the fields, cutting grass, striping fields, handling trash, unlocking the bathrooms in all the parks, keeping the bathrooms clean. The board did not fund that. Records clerk position at the PD, we have 1 records clerk that holds all the records for the entire police department. And so adding another position to that to reduce some of that strain and be planning for the future, because the person we have will retire at some point. Those are items that did not make the top. In capital, I'll try to remember a few. She's got a book, we probably could cheat and pull it out. The board did fund several things that they felt were really important, some servers and things like that individually, the fire, the expedition truck, a police car. They did not fund, for example, a dump truck for public works. They have 1 small dump truck, one ton small dump truck, and it is in really bad shape. The board stepped out in the year. That's not uncommon. We do that. We'll say, we'll take the risk, run it till it breaks, and we'll figure it out. It's not responding to a fire, so let's give it a shot. Kind of thought process. What else, Kimberly? Anything interesting on there I'm forgetting?
So the recreation truck?
So rec, for the entire maintenance department of 2 people, they have 1 truck. So if one guy's using the truck to work, they're literally driving their POV to Discount City to pick up concrete or to pick up lumber and driving it back. So they asked for a truck, they got that. Now, how do we figure we'll solve that? This is an example of where we hand vehicles down. Tom's driving the Expedition, that's $130,000. If the board continues on the path they're on, they buy a new emergency response vehicle, that Expedition will go into the fleet, And all the department heads and the manager will sit down and talk about what their needs are, and they'll rearrange trucks. So that expedition could end up in rec, and they'll be putting concrete in the back of the expedition. It could end up in public works, where one of our inspectors drives it, for example, or somebody who's better fit for an expedition. And then they take one of their older trucks and pass it down to rec, so we kind of get a 2-for-1. If we buy that fire expedition, we can come up with a second vehicle for rec without having to spend money. That's how the board kind of did that one. That's the interesting ones.
Yeah, that's the interesting ones.
That got your question right. That's a little bit more of the sausage construction. So a lot of what the board does, to Danny's point, a lot of what the board does is decide what you're actually going to buy. We switched to an expedition years ago for our chief, for example, to respond in, because he can put all his gear in the back, but it stays dry, but he also has a second seat if he needs to haul some other people with him. But now with our, for example, our newest fire marshal truck, we bought a truck and put a waterproof cover over the back. So all the gear is separated from the personal space. So all the gear that's dirty or, they have mandated cleaning periods for their gear, but it's specialized gear that has carcinogens and things like that. Now it doesn't have to be in the expedition. It can be in the back of the truck and separated from you as you're driving the vehicle. So the board said, let's make that change. So if the board passes the budget as it sits, the new truck will be a truck with a cover on the back, not an expedition. It also gives us future accountability because a truck's a whole lot easier to pass to another department than an expedition. So when it's no longer good for emergency, but it can work in rec, or it can work in public works or utility with a water plant, that can be handed down. Somebody else can use it when we get a new one for emergency services. So those are kind of the policy decisions that the board is constantly making to try to reduce expenses and be as smart as we can with the dollars that we do spend. And there's a lot of those that happen at the workshop. That is a great microcosm one that Danny just brought up. Paving, we didn't really talk about it a lot. The board has the penny in there for paving because motor vehicle tax at $7.50 is only generating, and we'll see at the end of the year when we get a full 12 months and 3 months after, $60,000 to $80,000 a year. That won't even pay the road we're spending, right? So we've been spending $1 million every 2 years. You all have seen that. We've been spending roughly between $800 and $1 million every 2 years. You get more bang for your buck if you do $1 million than $450,000 every year. Next year would be a paving year. So the idea was look at motor vehicle tax and see what it is. The board talked a lot about taking that $7.50, cranking it up to $25 or $30 instead, and do the motor vehicle tax. And they said, no, it's cheaper for our citizens to leave the $7.50 and do it as a penny on the tax rate. Because that, for average citizens in the room, that's $20. If we went to 30, it'd be $23, $22.50, right? So technically it's $1 too cheap. So they chose to do it with the tax rate. I think philosophically there's a challenge there because that means all of us are paying on our taxes to pave the roads, where the motor vehicle tax, if you don't own property in Havelock, but you have a car, which by the way we're 60% rentals, then you're actually paying to fix the roads when you register your car and pay your taxes. As opposed to if you live in a house right now and you have 3 vehicles and a trailer, you pay more than your share to fix the roads than the other way around. So philosophically it's a difference, but it's the same amount of money. The board chose to do the least impact to the property owners in Havelock. That's why they chose the penny for paving as opposed to doing the motor vehicle tax dial up. Even at that number, we're not going to have $1 million next year to pay with. And next year, I can give you a crystal ball. I can tell you for sure this is going to happen next year. There will be a very big conversation about how you're going to pay roads. If you want to spend $1 million to pay roads, next year you're going to have, quick math, $400,000, $450,000-ish to pay the roads with. And I might even estimate a little high. I mean like $380,000, $400,000. You're going to be half of where you really need to be. You've got a pallet on reserve, you can tap back, so we want to spend a few $100,000 out of that reserve account and put it towards paving. But you're not going to be at the $1 million next year. The board's going to have to figure that out next year. And they can stall something else to pave, right? The same way you would in your own house. I'm going to stall buying a new car for a year because I really need to buy an HVAC, and then next year I'll come back and buy the car, right? They can do that. It's not long-term healthy to do that, but that's going to be a big conversation. conversation next year is what does paving look like for the future? Because we really need to pay $1 million a year. If we're not, we're falling behind. Our roads are in the fair according to standards that we don't create. If we create standards, our roads will be excellent. We don't create standards. Standards are generalized and we use a paper survey from them. And we're in the fair group on their survey. Every year that we don't pay like we should, we're falling behind on fair and we end up out of fair. The board wants to be in fair. They don't want to get below fair. So that'll be a big conversation next year. Stay tuned. Other questions? Comments, Dan?
Our biggest problem is sewage, and one of the biggest problems with paving is the sewage is down underneath the streets in the back. So we have to fix the sewage first before we can spend the money on paving.
Right, lessons learned. There are a lot of roads that need to be paved right now that in the last package did not get sections have been paved because we know there's failing infrastructure underneath. And until you can afford to do failing infrastructure, it doesn't make sense to spend $500,000 to repair a road and then cut the road apart a year later because you're going to spend $3.5 million to replace the sewer, right? That's a dime chasing a dollar. So we try to plan that a little bit better now and install those roads. So Rick and Patrick handles paving, Rick handles utilities. They are in the same building every day. And they work on those projects together and try to plan that so it does make sense. We still can't control when we pave a road and it's got 1985 infrastructure and just the fact that you drove heavy equipment over it, cracked the seal, and then we gotta go back and cut into this brand new pavement because a line starts leaking. That does happen. It freaking sucks when it does, man. I mean, it hurts your feelings. When you got this beautiful road and you know you gotta do utility plan immediately and you couldn't anticipate that. That really sucks. But the ones we can anticipate, we try really hard to make sure that we are anticipating that, as Danny said, and that's kind of the board direction when they're doing paving projects. Is it's okay to install a road if that's why you're installing a road, but then give us a plan for the utility. Anything else? All right, we're going to hang around as long as you would like to talk about individual pieces. You've got all of staff here to talk to if you would like to. You've got commissioners, myself, we'll answer anything you got individually. If you want a copy of the budget, now you're super excited and intrigued about the budget, you just want your own copy. If you let Mary know, we can figure out how to make that happen. She's our clerk. She can get you a version of the package we got. She can get you can come up there and get a full line item. If you just want to come borrow it and stand at the counter and read, flip through it, you can do that. It's all public information. And last year's is on our website. You also can just set up office hours with me if you want, set up some time, and I'll pull out my budget books with the notes in them on what the board did and what they didn't do, what it looked like first, what it looked like second, and how we ended up, and you can look at whatever you like. All right? Y'all have a great night. Thank you for coming. Oh, and I need a motion to adjourn. Motion by Tyrone, second by Brenda. All those in favor?